For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the reigning king of late night, and it's pretty much a role that, though many have come close, no one has ever really been able to claim since his retirement in 1992 and, of course, his death in 2005. Hi, I'm Hot Toddy, and welcome to another TV edition of Get Real. If you haven't figured it out by the intro, if you haven't figured it out by the stuff behind me and my hat as well, we are going to be talking about the legendary, the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Johnny Carson. He was the third and probably most well-known host of The Tonight Show on NBC. And really, when you get into talking about the King of Late Night, really the question is, what hasn't been said about Johnny Carson? What can you say that hasn't already been said? Because, I mean, everyone has praised what he's done. Johnny Carson was one of the greatest performers of the 20th century, and I have been a lifelong fan of Johnny Carson. In fact, some of my earliest memories is of watching The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because I was very young. I was like 2 or 3 years old when he was still the host, so I probably shouldn't have been up at 11:30 at night. But, you know, sometimes you can't sleep, and I was watching The Tonight Show, and I remember him standing in front of that colored this curtain right here, the colored curtain, and just being amazed by it, and always finding him funny, even at a very young age. So I knew Johnny Carson is one of my influences, because I knew that I was going to be doing something, even if it was not my full-time career, if it was just something I was doing for fun. I would be doing something in the entertainment business, and here we are. YouTube gave a bunch of us that opportunity. And of course, being a big fan, obviously, like I said, I have a lot of stuff here. This right here and this right here are 2 giant DVD volumes of some fantastic, favorite moments from the show. As well as this one has full episodes, episodes even thought to be lost. This is a mini poster saying the King of Late Night, and has him, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then this is you can kind of hardly see it because my light is flashing directly on it, but this is an autograph photo. It wasn't autographed to me, but it was just kind of like a generically, he signed a bunch of photos, and somebody had one and was selling it, and I got it. So that's a photo of him back there as well. So, I'm a huge fan, and I just love the man to death. So, on this TV edition of Get Real, I kind of wanted to dig into the history of Johnny Carson as the host of The Tonight Show, and see what we can, dream up here, see what we can bring up. Before you can get into talking about The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, oh, my hat too, I didn't mention my hat. Yeah, that's a patch, and I bought the hat, and this is an iron-on patch, so I patched it on. This is one of many Johnny Carson hats that I have, but this one really stands out, so I really like this one. Okay, so I'm getting sidetracked, but I wanted to mention the hat too before we continued on.
Oh, good for you!
If we're going to talk about The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, we have to talk about the history of The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson, of course, was the third host of The Tonight Show. A lot of people, especially nowadays, think, well, he must have been he was the original host because he was there the longest. Not true. He is still the longest running host of the show, but he didn't get it started. No, that started in 1954 with comedian Steve Allen. In fact, on the very first episode of Tonight, Steve Allen famously said this:
I can't think of too much to tell you about it, except I want to give you the bad news first. This program is going to go on forever.
And little did we know that was literally the truth. The Tonight Show is 70 years old. It has been on the air since 1954 and continues to be a major, massive institution, of course, with Jimmy Fallon at the helm. Now, when Steve Allen hosted the show, they really hadn't found their footing. They didn't really know what The Tonight Show was going to be, so he kind of just molded it into whatever he wanted it to be. Because I think NBC's original idea for The Tonight Show was that, because, they had the Today Show, which is like a news show. It's a long, like 4-hour news show covering all the major topics around the world. So they wanted something to kind of counter that at night. So you would have Today, and then Tonight. And Tonight was going to be fun. But they didn't really know what to do on Tonight. And so they kind of just winged it, and really what it ended up turning into was a lot like what we ended up having with The Tonight Show now. Both Jimmy Fallon and Jay Leno really did and currently do a lot of the things that Steve Allen did, including sketches, characters, just making people laugh and playing games. Steve Allen was huge about playing games with audience members and guests that were on the show. So it was really just like a all for fun show. It was just all crazy madness. It was sort of like there was a documentary that came out a few years ago. It was kind of like, it was like the underground show. You know, if you knew about it, you were a part of the cool kids. If you didn't know about it, you weren't. Because you got to keep in mind, in 1954, they weren't expecting you to stay up late to watch it in your bedroom. You know, most homes at that time had maybe one TV, if any at all. So they were expecting you to not only stay awake until 11:30, but to stay in your living room at 11:30 and watch The Tonight Show. And people did it. You know, we like to think of that era as this, gee willikers, golly era where everybody went to sleep at 10 p.m. and got up at 8 a.m. and you know, kiss the wife, go to work, all that good stuff. And that was there at, you know, throughout that era, but people also wanted to have fun, and The Tonight Show was fun. Tonight, as it was called back then. And so that's what it was. It was just this crazy late night show with Steve Allen. Then in 1957, Steve Allen stepped down and Jack Paar took over the show. Now, Jack Paar remolded the show and turned it more into what we know it today as a late night talk show. It was kind of like the comedic version of the Today Show. He kind of molded it to where it was more of an interview show. So he sat down with more celebrities and interviewed them, had conversations. He was also the first late night talk show host to have political figures, political candidates come on and, you know, put their point of view across and let people hear them, sometimes for the first time, because again, TV wasn't as widespread back then. So maybe, you know, you only had time to watch TV late at night. And so there they are. You get to see John F. Kennedy on The Tonight Show with Jack Paar. And then Jack Paar would also, he would also do some sketches here and there, but his thing was like in between, like monologue, because that was another thing. He introduced the monologue, doing jokes at the top of the show.
As I was saying before I was interrupted, I believe my last words were that there must be a better way of making a living than this. Well, I have looked.
And then following that up with, you know, talking about something silly going on in the world, or showing off silly props or silly products or something like that to make the people laugh, and then into interviews and talking to people and a musical guest. So that was sort of the new standard of late night talk shows, was that. And I say shows, it was the only one. And so he perfected that, the way that we know late night talk shows, kind of, you know, mostly how we know it now. And that's the point I'm getting to. When Jack Paar left the show in 1962, the hunt was on for the next host of Tonight. Who was going to take on this role? And they landed on Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson was an up-and-coming comedian. He'd had a few shows in the 50s. He was currently hosting a game show called Who Do You Trust, along with his trusty sidekick, Ed McMahon. They were doing the show great, and they wanted him to do it. So he took over the show, and on October 1st, 1962, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, premiered.
From New York, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. Johnny's guests tonight are Joan Crawford, Rudy Valley, Tony Bennett, Mel Brooks, the Phoenix Singers, Skitch Henderson with the NBC Orchestra, and me. I'm Ed McMahon. Right now, let's welcome the fellow you waited 6 months to see.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. This is kind of an emotional thing for me because I've known about this show for a long time. And the newspapers and the magazines, and I've probably been interviewed 150 times in the last 9 months since I've known about this. As I say, you work up to it. We come over here this afternoon, we meet the guests that are on the show, and you get kind of charged up. I don't mean to be maudlin about it, but I know that tonight a lot of my friends are watching all over the country. And I only have one feeling as I stand here knowing that so many people are watching. I want my man.
Like any great show and any new era of a show, it had to grow. It had to find its footing, had to find its balance, and Johnny had to kind of explore that because he really didn't know what to do. Everybody at that point brought their own flavor to The Tonight Show. Steve Allen was doing funny skits and funny characters and playing games and being silly. Jack Paar was about sitting down with people and getting to know them and understanding who they are and what they're about and what's coming up for them so that we could keep kind of have that inside knowledge of what was going on in Hollywood and in politics and so on and so forth. And so Johnny really kind of came to the conclusion, why don't we do all of that? And so that's what his version of the Tonight Show became, was a little bit of everything that we had come to love about the Tonight Show's past. He started doing, silly characters and silly sketches, beloved characters that people still talk about to this day. Karnak the Magnificent is still one of my all-time favorite characters in any media. So he brought to the show that elegance that Steve Allen brought of just being entertaining and silly and fun for the crowd, but then he also brought in that interview element. He still continued on by bringing people from all walks of life onto the show, not just celebrities and politicians, but also regular people that may have a strange talent or something that got them in the local paper, but it was so interesting enough they said we have to have them on the show. So Johnny kind of he was sort of like the first, I don't want to say this completely, but it is kind of true. I guess he was kind of like the first influencer.
Okay.
Because he was sort of like the first host, TV show host that really got down on our level, because he was a guy from the Midwest. He wasn't from New York or LA. He was a guy from the Midwest who went and fought in World War II, came back, and then just got his career in broadcasting. Started in radio, started doing little local shows, and then eventually worked his way up. And then, but lo and behold, he got the one of the biggest television shows on at that time, and still to this day, The Tonight Show. You keep in mind, there's only been, 6 hosts of The Tonight Show in 70 years, so that should tell you something, that NBC is very picky about who they pick to host that particular show. And so Johnny was the guy, and so he just brought that element of just that likable, nice guy. He wasn't too wacky like Steve Allen. He wasn't very conservative and very sophisticated and intelligent like Jack Parr. Not that he wasn't intelligent, but my point is that he kind of got down onto the people's level, which was something that had never been seen before. So he did that, plus being funny and talking to guests. I mean, there's a reason why he was the host and then had the #1 spot in late night TV for 30 years, because no one could do that. No one could do it better than Johnny. And then with 30 years, I mean, at that point you had Steve Allen, who was the host of Tonight, for 3 years. Then Jack Parr did it for 5 years. So obviously it was kind of amazing when he hit 10 years in 1972, and then 20 years in 1982, and then 30 years in 1992. That was unheard of at that time, and is unheard of now even, because nobody has hosted. Again, he is still the longest running host of The Tonight Show to this day. But obviously with 30 years, I mean, you have all these opportunities to create these insanely memorable moments. The moment that really solidified that he was going to be, if not the best host of The Tonight Show, definitely was going to be one of the best. He is the best. But the moment that solidified it was that historic tomahawk throw with Ed Ames.
Right.
I didn't even know you were Jewish.
That solidified it. That sealed the deal. That not only could he be funny with people by himself, but he could be funny with celebrities. He could be funny with anybody. He can make any situation fun.
They purr. And
Relax. They say if you look an animal right in the face and talk to them, then they know you're not scared.
Burt Reynolds.
Hey!
Doc, let's go. Doc, on your chair. On your He punched me right in the mouth.
Doc, I don't do that. He's all right. He's just playing.
Playing, man.
Was he spitting? Was that saliva?
And because he was so incredible at what he did on that show, you know, the other networks, ABC and CBS, were like, you know, maybe we should look into doing late night. Maybe we can finally compete. Why they thought that, I don't know. They tried a whole bunch of different people. Merv Griffin, Dick Cavett. Later, they tried Pat Sajak. Joan Rivers, who was even a friend of Johnny Carson's, was discovered by Johnny Carson, had been on The Tonight Show many times, even was the guest host, got her own late night talk show in 1987 and destroyed their friendship because of it. So, you know, there was a lot of opportunities where they tried to take down Johnny Carson, but Johnny was just too good. Johnny was the foundation. And any late night host that came after that, whether they were going to be on The Tonight Show or not, were really just the stepping stones. But the place where it got held, the place where it was holding everything up, was The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. And so many people tried. Joey Bishop was another one. He tried to do a late night talk show, but all the other late night talk shows for the next 30 years would fail due to the fact that Johnny was just unbeatable. The only time he started to slip was towards the end of his time, and I think this really helped contribute to him realizing that it was time for him to step down. Was in 1989, the very first late night talk show host that really became a competitor.
From Stage 29 at Carson Studios on Melrose Avenue in the heart of Hollywood, California, in these United States. The planet we cover is the Arsenio Hall Show, starring Arsenio Hall.
The Arsenio Hall Show. And Arsenio just brought in that younger crowd, because by this point, Johnny Carson was in his mid-60s. The show had definitely kind of gotten that more elegant. It definitely had that more like elegant, more elder. I don't want to say like elderly, but it had that like elderly appeal. It was more for the older folks. And so Arsenio appealed to that younger audience. And Johnny started realizing, I'm not reaching the younger audience like I used to. He could do it back in the day. He could do it for 30 years. But then towards that end, through those last few years, he realized, it's starting to get more difficult, and so that's what really kind of convinced him to step down in 1992, was that it was becoming more and more, increasingly more difficult to hold that position. But for almost all of those 30 years, he was unbeatable. Nobody would dare go up against Johnny Carson. That is Tonight. That is late night television. There was no one else that can do it, and that's why The Tonight Show was such a standard at that time, why so many comedians, why so many celebrities wanted to go on The Tonight Show, because they knew it would make their career. Their career would explode if they made that appearance, that coveted appearance on Tonight. And they were absolutely right. So many celebrities were discovered for the very first time through The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. And it's just a testament just to how amazing he was, and that's why he was unbeatable, because he was late night television. And the way he handled late night is definitely a lot different than what you see today. You know, I see so many detractors on social media who are like, boy, Johnny was sure great. Late night television is nothing like that now. It's so woke, it's so bad, it's so biased, it's so politically this, that, and the other thing. And the reason why it's that way is because times change, culture changes. For the longest time, late night television was just for fun. It was about, you know, kind of reaching out and making you laugh after having a hard day at work before you fell asleep. And that's what Johnny did for 30 years. And Jay Leno did that after him. Conan O'Brien did that as well. David Letterman did that. They never got deep into politics. The thing about it is that Johnny Carson was very progressive. He didn't really want to talk about that because in those days, you know, back in the, you know, nowadays you think of this reason and you're like, well, that's not right. You should take your stance and make it known that you're not going to be an evil person. But back in those days, he didn't want to offend any group. He wanted everybody to come together. He kind of wanted The Tonight Show to be that utopia where people could come together and just enjoy and laugh together, and then, you know, go about your lives afterwards. But for this hour or hour and a half, because the Tonight Show was both an hour and a half, and then it was shortened down to an hour in the early 80s when he renegotiated his contract, so that's why we have it as an hour now. He didn't care as long as you were there to have fun. Then afterwards you can go do what you need to do. But this was a time for fun and entertainment. And so that's why he never got too deep into politics.
I think one of the dangers if you are a comedian, which basically I am, if you start to take yourself too seriously, and start to comment on social issues, your sense of humor suffers somewhere.
And that's what also made him so crafty, because he could make fun of or praise any politician from any side of the aisle, and people would be on his side. It was said once, or many times now, that a politician knew, especially presidents knew they were in trouble if Johnny Carson started making fun of them. If he started making jokes about them on a nightly basis.
I read today that George Bush is sending out 90,000 Christmas cards this year. Now, the big question is, will Dan Quayle finish licking those envelopes in time for
They knew that their careers were coming to an end when Johnny Carson started making jokes. And it wasn't that he liked or disliked or liked any of those politicians. He just left no stone unturned, which was something you could do back then. And it's something that was done all the way up until like the last decade. I don't want to get into the political scene now, but Donald Trump really did change a lot of things. He changed the way that we kind of view politics and how we kind of have to take a stance. Because there's a group of people that feel they need to take a stance of supporting Donald Trump, and then there's a group of people that look at him and see what the things that he does and says, and they believe that that's not right, and so they need to take that stance. And in late night television, that's what they're doing. They're taking the stance, which is something that is needed right now. I know you may think, well, no, it's not. I mean, you can change that and go back to just having fun the way Johnny did it and Conan and all of them. But it's different. Times have changed. That's why Johnny Carson isn't... Well, Johnny Carson's not on TV anymore because he's sadly gone. But that's why Jay Leno isn't on TV anymore. That's why David Letterman isn't on TV anymore. Even Conan. Because their way of doing comedy, though it was great, and they are legends, all of them are legends in this business, times change, cultures change. And so you have to just kind of get with it. And so now the end thing for late night comedy is politics. It's kind of what it's all based around, even as opposed to back in the day when it was like, looked upon, and you could make fun of a politician no matter what side of the aisle they were on, and people would laugh. It's very staunch now, this side and this side. There is no moderate. There really is nothing in between nowadays. And so you kind of have to run that gamut. Are you going to be, more of a liberal late night host like Stephen Colbert, or are you going to be more of like a conservative late night host like Greg Gutfeld on Fox News? It's you have to kind of take those stances now. But Johnny never did that. He didn't want to do that. And he was very wise for doing that during that time period, because it would have run a rift.
I try not to, and we've had some criticism on the show. Some critics over the years says, well, the show has no great sociological value. It's not controversial. It's not deep. The Tonight Show basically is to amuse people, to make them laugh.
Again, though, I mentioned a minute ago he was very progressive. There's a historic episode of The Tonight Show where Johnny wanted to have all the progressive people on his show. He wanted to have Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Robert F. Kennedy. He wanted to have these people towards the end of the 60s, that late 60s period where you had all of these radical ideas from radical people who were kind of stepping outside the bounds of the conservatism that we had seen for so long up to that point. But he knew that he would be violating kind of his viewership in the South, Midwest, where he came from, places like that. So he said, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it on a night that I'm off. And he had Harry Belafonte, a black performer, guest host The Tonight Show, and then have all those guests.
And I don't want to give you an impression that as a Baptist preacher, I don't have faith in God in the air. It's simply that I've had more experience with him on the ground.
I ride up and down in my building every day in the elevator, and I see a man that says he's Johnny Carson. So it's great to see you finally.
It's not really...
So, and these were all people that Johnny wanted to have on the show, and he did it on this particular show. And so it was subtle. It was his subtle way of saying, this is what I believe in. These are the people that I believe in, and I believe would do the best job. But you'll never know because I'm doing it this way. So they just thought, oh, Harry Belafonte's there. That's probably who he wanted. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. The point is that he knew how to handle it, and so that's how he handled it. But that's the kind of the point that I want to make here when it comes to late night television during Johnny Carson's time, as opposed to what it is now. Johnny Carson's era was different. you could have opposing viewpoints and still get along. You really can't have that today. So people kind of have to dig their heels into the ground and make a stand. And that's why late night television is the way it is. It's not, I don't know if it, my personal opinion, I don't look at it as bad or good or anything. I just look at that as the landscape of late night television. And I do believe that the hosts that are hosting these shows were the right people. They're the right choices. Jimmy Fallon hosting The Tonight Show is the right choice. Stephen Colbert hosting The Late Show on CBS. That is the right choice. Jimmy Kimmel having his own late night show on ABC. That is the right choice. These are the people that we need now. But Johnny Carson is who we needed back then. And he did it to a T, the way that we needed him to do it. And that leads me into his legacy. I mean, Johnny Carson left it all out on the field, as they say. He inspired so many comedians, so many different people for decades. Obviously, the two biggest ones that he influenced the most was Jay Leno and David Letterman, both of whom became late night powerhouses themselves after Johnny retired with their own 11:30 shows. Jay Leno, of course, taking over The Tonight Show. I did a Get Real TV edition about Conan O'Brien a few years ago, and I talked about how he got screwed. He should still be the host of The Tonight Show, in my opinion. You know, he should be in his 14th year now, or 15th year now, I guess, as host of The Tonight Show. But circumstances as they are, and whatever situation NBC was having with Jay Leno, you know, they let him come back and host the show and made Conan step down. But Conan was another person who was inspired by Johnny Carson, and that's why to this day every late night talk show that you see, even if it's different than how, you know, if you're not watching it because I don't like the way they do it now, it's still being done exactly how Johnny Carson did it. Monologue, sketch, guests. That's how it's done. And they have a blast doing it. And getting back to Jimmy Fallon, of course, Jimmy Fallon, of course, now is the host of The Tonight Show. You know, he brings a lot of elements from all the late night hosts before him. He brings sketches like Johnny Carson and Steve Allen did. He plays games like Steve Allen did. He does the in-depth interviews with politicians like Jack Paar and Johnny Carson did, and Jay Leno. And then he does, talking to people like Johnny and Jay did. I mean, he's inspired by all of them. And that's the best thing about The Tonight Show, is that every host improves on that. They grow on that particular, vision that was originally looked at back in the mid-50s for this show called Tonight. And so it's really inspiring to see each generation come together. I've never seen this wall before at NBC Studios, but they do have it at Jimmy Fallon's ride at Universal Studios. And I saw this because it's a replica of what they have at the NBC Studios. And it's this picture on a wall. It's a wall-sized picture of all the hosts of The Tonight Show. Steve Allen, Jack Paar, Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, and Jimmy Fallon. And you just look at that and you say, yeah. Conan deserved more time. I think Jay should have stepped away when he did. Maybe Conan do a decade or so, and then now maybe we just have Jimmy Fallon. Regardless, though, you look at that wall and you say, yeah, these were the right people. They did the right thing. I mean, I think David Letterman would have been a better host for The Tonight Show. I'm not the biggest fan of Jay Leno, but I understand why they chose him, because he was a major talent, and he still is a major talent. And nothing horribly against Jay Leno. It's just certain things when it comes to Leno. But no, you look at that wall and you say, yeah, those are the hosts of The Tonight Show. And right there in the middle is the king of late night, Johnny Carson, who really took the show and ran with it, because for 30 years he showed the world how you do late night television, and he showed how you can do it in this era and how you can do it in future eras. But just always remember your fans. Always remember that these are the people that love you the most, and these are the people that are going to make you what you are. So make sure that you show them all the love in the world. And that is why, to this day, almost 20 years after he passed away, he is still the king of late night.
I bid you a very heartfelt good night.